Part 2. So, we've drifted west from Mesopotamia's cranky rivers to the Nile. And honestly, the Nile was the best roommate ancient humanity ever had. Predictable, generous, rarely threw tantrums. Every summer it flooded, spread nutrient-rich silt across the fields, and politely receded, leaving behind the perfect soil for crops. Compared to the Tigris and Euphrates, which behaved like caffeinated toddlers, the Nile was basically the chill parent who keeps everything running smoothly. And because of that, Egypt got to play civilization on easy mode for a while. Their neighbors were constantly in famine or war, but Egypt was busy inventing elaborate burial rituals and writing in hieroglyphics nobody could read until 1822. Priorities. Now, the thing with Egypt is that people tend to imagine it as this unbroken line of pharaohs, pyramids, and gold masks, like a Netflix series that ran smoothly for 3,000 years. In reality, it was more like several messy spin-offs, separated by awkward cancellations and reboots. The Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom, each with its own cast of kings, collapses, and the occasional foreign invasion. But let's ease into it. The Old Kingdom is where we get the pyramids. You know, those giant triangular tombs that every school child builds out of sugar cubes at some point. The first pyramid, the Step Pyramid at Saqqara, was designed by Imhotep. Yes, the same Imhotep later turned into a mummy villain in Hollywood films. In real life, though, he was just an architect who got very good at stacking stone. Pharaoh Djoser wanted a fancy tomb, Imhotep obliged, and suddenly everyone else was like, oh, bigger tombs, that's the trend now. Cue the Great Pyramids at Giza. Khufu, also known as Cheops, built the biggest one. Or rather, thousands of laborers did, while Khufu presumably supervised from a shady pavilion. There's a lot of myth about whether the pyramids were built by slaves. Modern evidence suggests it was more like conscripted workers, farmers during the off-season, fed with bread, beer, and the vague promise of spiritual glory. Imagine being halfway through your barley harvest when the government says, "Congratulations, you've been selected to haul limestone blocks in the desert sun." Truly a win-win. But here's the thing, building pyramids that huge wasn't sustainable. Khufu's successors tried, but by the time you get to smaller pyramids like the one belonging to Menkaure, you can feel the budget cuts. The Old Kingdom eventually collapsed, partly because pyramids drained the treasury, partly because the Nile had a few underwhelming flood years, and partly because local governors, the nomarchs, decided they were tired of taking orders from a central authority. Egypt's first intermediate period was basically every regional noble saying, you know what, I'm king now, which is always fun. Then came the Middle Kingdom, a sort of second-chance reboot. The pharaohs moved the capital around, built new irrigation works, and tried to reassert central control. They also leaned heavily into literature. Tales like the story of Sinohi pop up here. It's about a court official who flees Egypt, has adventures abroad, and then begs to come back and be buried properly at home, which tells you something about how obsessed Egyptians were with death rituals. You could run away, live a full life elsewhere, but in the end, you just really wanted to be embalmed with some amulets and a good tomb inscription. But again, things fell apart. Egypt wasn't invincible. Enter the Hyksos. They were basically outsiders from the Levant who rolled into the Nile Delta with superior tech, horse-drawn chariots, better bows, and said, "Nice kingdom, we'll take it from here." For a while, Egypt had the awkward experience of being ruled by foreigners in their own land, which naturally the native elites hated. Eventually, the Egyptians rallied. Kamose and his brother Amos, yes, they had confusingly similar names, led campaigns to kick out the Hyksos. And boom, the new kingdom was born. This was Egypt's golden age. Huge temples, vast armies, famous pharaohs. This is the era when Egypt finally decided it wasn't enough to just sit by the Nile. They were going to conquer their neighbors too. Expansion into Nubia, Syria, Palestine. Egypt got aggressive. And speaking of famous pharaohs, this is where we get some of the household names. Hatshepsut, for instance, one of the few female pharaohs, and she ruled successfully for over 2 decades. She built massive temples, sent trade expeditions, and generally proved that, yes, women could run a kingdom just fine. Of course, after her death, her stepson Thutmose III tried to erase her memory by chiseling her name off monuments. Classic fragile male energy. Then there's Akhenaten. Oh, Akhenaten, the pharaoh who decided to reinvent religion. He basically said, enough with the old gods, we're worshipping Aten, the sun disk now. He even moved the capital to a brand new city, Amarna, to show he meant business. Artists under his reign created this weirdly realistic style, depicting Akhenaten with elongated features, a bit of a belly, and an overall look that makes you wonder if he was trying to cosplay as an alien. His wife Nefertiti is the one you've seen in all those museum busts, still a style icon 3,000 years later. But here's the catch. When Akhenaten died, everyone basically went, yeah, no thanks. His radical monotheism was scrapped, the old gods came back, and his successors quietly erased him from official history. Among those successors was Tutankhamun, better known as King Tut. He's famous not because of what he did, he died at about 18, so not much, but because his tomb was found intact in the 20th century. The sheer amount of gold in there gave Egyptology its most iconic PR boost. Fast forward and we meet Ramses II, Ramses the Great, builder of temples, father of too many children to count, and star of the Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites. That battle was a mess, but both sides later claimed victory because of course they did. Ramses lived to around 90, which in the ancient world is basically immortal. He outlived many of his wives and children, and his statues still loom everywhere. It's like he had a personal brand manager working overtime. But even Egypt's golden age couldn't last forever. By the end of the New Kingdom, corruption, weak pharaohs, and invasions chipped away at its power. The so-called Sea Peoples, a mysterious confederation of raiders, showed up around 1200 BCE, attacking Egypt and everyone else in the eastern Mediterranean. The Egyptians barely survived, and though they claimed victory, it was a hollow one. The kingdom shrank, wealth dried up, and once again, regional governors grabbed power. Cue the Third Intermediate Period, which is just historians speak for everything was chaotic again. Multiple dynasties ruling at once, Libyan chieftains in charge, Nubians marching in from the south. Egypt basically became the neighborhood everyone wanted to move into and remodel. And eventually, it all unraveled. Assyrians came, then Persians, then Alexander the Great, who rolled through like, nice pyramids, I'll take it. After him, Egypt became the Ptolemaic kingdom, ruled by Greek pharaohs. This is where Cleopatra enters the chat, but she's so famous she deserves her own sleepy ramble later. So what brought Egypt down? Honestly, the same cocktail as everywhere else. Overexpansion, bad rulers, invasions, and plain exhaustion. You can only keep a giant kingdom together for so long before cracks form. Even the Nile couldn't save them forever. But for a civilization that lasted over 3,000 years, Egypt still takes the prize for endurance. While Mesopotamian empires flickered in and out like dying light bulbs, Egypt just kept going. Pyramids, temples, endless mummies, a kingdom so obsessed with the afterlife that, ironically, it outlived almost all of its rivals in cultural memory.